thank you all for coming this evening. It's a great credit to you and to the Institute. It's such a wonderful turnout. I hope I don't disappoint you too much in what I have to say, but I'm very conscious that what I say now is only a part of the evening, and in fact the questions I hope will be a much more interesting and stimulating part of the evening than my prepared notes. I'm very conscious there are a lot of people in this room who are experts in Australian foreign policy through a range of experiences over many years, and I know that they will be listening closely and will no doubt have some curly questions as I proceed. But thank you again, all of you, for coming this evening. Let me say that from the outset, the government's commitment to the Security Council term is far more than about just being there. It's not about just winning a place and spending 2 years sitting on the council. The candidacy was grounded very much in a judgment that it was in Australia's fundamental national security interests to serve. As you know, the Security Council has primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. That comes from the United Nations Charter, Article 24. It is central to a rules-based international system in which Australia has a very substantial stake. I think we always have to recognise that as a medium power that often is able to, as the expression goes, punch above its weight, but a power that doesn't have a great number of natural friends and allies around the world. We depend very much on a rules-based international system, whether it be in the area of security and international peace or in the economic area. The Council has political, moral and legal authority to address threats to international peace and security. And it's crucial to remember that it is the Council that's the only body with the right to authorise the use of force, and that its decisions are binding on all 193 UN member states. And Australia, even when not a member of the Council, has relied very heavily on it. The Council authorised Australian-led support for Timor-Leste. The Council provides a basis for the international force in Afghanistan. The Council listed Jemaah Islamiyah as a proscribed terrorist organisation after the 2002 Bali bombing. And of course the Council is responsible for applying sanctions on countries such as North Korea and Iran for their nuclear weapons programs. These are all issues of important strategic interest to Australia. That said, the Council is, and I'm afraid to say this, an imperfect institution. It is sometimes marked by inaction. Crucially, at the moment, it is marked by inaction in relation to the situation in Syria. As a former ambassador to Syria and Lebanon, someone who spent their first posting overseas in Damascus back in the early 80s, I'm personally, obviously, very touched by the tragedy that's occurring in Syria, and the failure of the Council to act in relation to Syria is a failure of all its members. This is a point I've made to ministers, that you can bask in the glory of being a Council member, but you also have to acknowledge when the Council fails to act. As a member of the Council, you share in that failure. But when it works well, it delivers strongly. Timor-Leste is an obvious example of that. Timor-Leste came off the Council's agenda at the end of December last year, following the conclusion of the United Nations mandate. I was, several years ago, head of our international organisations branch at the time of the Australian intervention in East Timor. And I well remember how hard we fought and argued in New York to get the Security Council endorsement of a UN operation in relation to East Timor. Many years later we can look back at what has been a remarkable success story. As Les mentioned, Australia was elected with very strong support, 140 votes in the first round. And recent experience, as far as I can recall, only Turkey has had a better result in a contested election for council membership. And our support came from all regions across the globe. It demonstrated Australia's standing in global affairs, the significant contribution that we've made to international peace and security over many decades, but importantly, it represented a recognition by those 140 countries of Australia's capacity to make a serious and constructive contribution to the work of the Council. And I think all Australians should take some pride in the fact that that was a crucial element in why we got all those votes. People didn't vote for us just because we were nice, or that they thought we played cricket well or badly, or because we happened to be a member of the Commonwealth. They voted for us because they believed Australia could actually make a serious contribution to the work of the Council. As Les says, noted also, we've served on the Council previously. This will be our 5th term. We served previously in 46-47, including being the first President of the Council, as Les mentioned, 56, 57, 73, 74, 85, 86. The real difference now from the last time we served is the Council's agenda has expanded and increased enormously. The number of missions, mandates, cross-cutting themes that the Council deals with is huge. People often ask me, oh, how often does the Council meet? And they sort of seem to be under the impression that they probably get together on a Tuesday at about 3:30 in the afternoon, spend a couple of hours looking up at the roof or looking down at their shoes, and then sort of adjourn and go off and play golf or whatever it is you do in New York. But in fact the Council meets pretty well every day of the working week. They try and avoid meeting 5 out of 5 days, but inevitably they meet 5 out of 5, usually from 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning until often quite late in the evening. And of course if there is a real crisis running, they'll be meeting on Saturdays and Sundays. And that's just the Council itself. There are 20-odd subsidiary bodies of the Council, various committees and working groups of the Council, which are also meeting on a daily basis. So it is a very active agenda and a very active commitment. So when we were running for the Council and on the day we got elected, we were under no illusions about the challenges which we faced being a member of the Council. And government was kind enough, it's acknowledged at a time of somewhat austerity within the system, to provide DFAT with additional resources to meet our responsibilities. And that allowed us to put extra positions into our mission in New York. It's allowed us to put extra positions into some of our missions in Africa, or some of our embassies and high commissions in Africa, and for us to establish the task force which I run in Canberra. But whilst it's a DFAT face, if you like, it's very much a whole of government effort, and a number of different departments and agencies are very closely involved. For instance, the task force I have has representatives from AusAid, it has representatives from the Department of Defence, it has representatives from the Australian Federal Police, who are agencies that have a very close engagement with the Council's agenda. And also, as part of our approach, we engaged in a very extensive range of consultations with others, in particular the P5, the permanent 5 members of the Council. I went to Washington in November to talk there. We had the Russians, the French and the British all came to Canberra at quite senior levels The fact that that was in November, in the middle of the Northern Hemisphere winter, I'm sure had nothing to do with their desire to be in Canberra. And then I was in Beijing again just before Christmas to talk to our Chinese friends about council membership. And we've also been talking to the South Koreans who were elected as a member of the council at the same time as us, and a range of others to get their experiences. Because being a member of the council, it's important to understand the dynamics of what council membership is about. You have to bear in mind that all council members, whether they be permanent 5 or the elected 10, bring their own particular set of interests, their own particular perspectives to council membership. Obviously, our council membership gives Australia significant opportunities. It enables to help us shape international responses to some of the most pressing peace and security challenges globally. It enables us to advance some of our core security interests. It allows us to reinforce alliance and key partnership relationships. And importantly, it allows us the opportunity to assist in strengthening the Council's role in maintaining international peace and security. As part of that process, in preparing and engaging on Council activity, we've been very pleased to work with you, members of the AIIA, with the UNAA, with ACFIT, with individuals such as Professor Ramesh Thakur, on the preparations we will be holding, on the preparation for regular talks we'll be holding with civil society, academia and policy institutes. One of our intentions is to ensure that over these 2 years we engage as much as we can with civil society here in Australia about our council membership. It's important that we take that opportunity, and frankly it's an opportunity for DFAT, for government in Canberra, to reach out to civil society and using our council membership as a lever for that. Our overall approach is to ensure that Australia plays a credible and constructive role, focusing on where we can add value to the Council's work, in line with our interests, drawing on our experiences. Importantly for that, our experiences in regard to Cambodia, Timor-Leste and the Solomon Islands. And ensuring, as I said earlier, that our Council membership benefits Australia beyond the Council's agenda in relation to our broader interests and our term. In that context, I often remind people that in 2014 Australia will be hosting the G20, and we will also be a member of the United Nations Security Council. That's a pretty unique confluence of events as far as Australia is concerned. We'll be hosting what is now the world's preeminent economic and financial gathering, and will be a member of the Security Council, the world's preeminent body responsible for international peace and security. We need to ensure that Australia takes full advantage of that opportunity. In terms of immediate priorities, key priorities, Afghanistan will be an important issue for Australia over the next 2 years. In that context, we've been given the pen, as it's known in Security Council parlance, in relation to Afghanistan. That means Australia is responsible for the initial drafting of resolutions of the Council in relation to Afghanistan. At the moment, we're actually engaged in New York in drafting a resolution to renew the mandate for UNAMA, the United Nations Assistance Mission to Afghanistan. That mandate comes up for renewal next month in late March. So we are working on the new draft resolution which authorises the UNAMA presence in Afghanistan. Later in the year we'll have responsibility for drafting the Security Council resolution which authorises the presence of the International Security Force in Afghanistan. This will be a key issue for us, particularly in working with the P5, the permanent members, over the next 2 years, as we see the transition process in Afghanistan over 2013-2014 leading to a very new environment in Afghanistan in 2015. And our interest in ensuring that that process is as smooth as possible and that the international community responds effectively. As you know, we've been pressing very hard for a timely and tough response to recent North Korean action, which continues to threaten international peace and security with its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. And notwithstanding the failure of the Council to act, we're deeply concerned about the security and humanitarian crisis in Syria, and we will continue to work for strong action to bring about a Syrian-led political transition. As you'll know, Senator Carr has been very active, in particular, in pursuing proposals to protect hospitals and health workers in Syria. We've also been working very hard in our first 2 months on strengthening the effectiveness of sanctions regimes. Australia was allocated the chair of 3 of the sanctions regimes which come under the Council. There are 13 altogether. We got 3 of probably the most important sanctions regimes, those dealing with Al-Qaeda, the Taliban and Iran. We'll also be working very hard to meet the sorts of commitments that we made during our campaign. And one of those key commitments was working with the Council to ensure that Council cooperation with regional organisations is at its most efficient and effective. The African Union in particular is a key here. We'll also be working very hard to ensure that the links between security and development are recognised in the Council's activity and work. One of the failures, we believe, of the Council over the years has been its failure to ensure that there is a clear relationship between security, setting up a peacekeeping operation, getting security on the ground, but then the next step of development. Incorporating in the Council's thinking conflict prevention and what the professionals like to refer to as horizon scanning, which as far as I can work out means just trying to think what might happen next. The Council actually has traditionally been very cautious in engaging in conflict prevention. The view has been traditionally the Council acts when something happens, rather than looking to ensure that it doesn't happen. We will be working very hard to instill in Council thinking the notion of conflict prevention and thinking outwards, thinking towards the future. Importantly, too, to work very hard on preserving and expanding norms in relation to the protection of civilians during armed conflict. And we want to ensure that efforts that have been pursued over recent years to ensure greater transparency and accountability in the Council's action are further pursued. One of the things that I'm doing and my colleagues in New York is doing are regular briefings of non-Council members. I brief members of the Diplomatic Corps in Canberra on what is going on in the Council. My colleagues in New York do a similar exercise there. The first 2 months seem to have been very busy, though in fact people tell me in relative terms as far as Council membership is concerned, it's been fairly quiet, relatively speaking. But for us it's been very busy in New York, Canberra and at our posts. The Council does have a broad agenda, and I think in the first 2 months Australia has been recognised as being a strong and credible member of the Council, and the responsibilities we've been given in relation to Afghanistan and the sanctions committees are a reflection of that. It's important to remember and recognise that each Council is different. The Council we have in 2014 is a different body from the Council we had in 2013. In 2013, Germany, India, Brazil and South Africa are all members of the Council. They are not members of the Council in 2014. We've got 4 very major, serious countries that are not on the Council. That means that other members of the Council do look to countries like Australia, to the Republic of Korea, to really put in a significant effort. As we knew before we started, the role of the Permanent 5 is crucial in the Council. For better or worse, and as you may recall, Australia argued very strongly against the use of the veto at the time of the establishment of the Council. The veto is a fact of life. But interestingly, it's not just the veto. In fact, fact, the veto is a less important issue in the role of P5 than the fact that they are permanent members. They've been doing this for 40, 50, 60 years. It's second nature to them. For us, we come onto the council after a long gap. We have to establish new practices, new processes. The sheer weight of corporate knowledge and experience that the permanent 5 brings is something that, you know, we just cannot match. As I mentioned earlier, we've seen council action in response to North Korea. We have ongoing negotiation on Afghanistan resolution. But what has struck us, I guess, certainly struck me, is that the amount of time the council spends on issues in relation to Africa. When we started, people told me, oh, Africa takes up about 65–70% of the council's agenda. That was a huge white lie. I've discovered it takes about 120% of the council's agenda. It's a tragic fact that the range of situations, the range of conflicts in Africa are so enormous that they occupy so much of the council's time. And the council has met already several times this year to discuss the situation in Mali, and now we are looking at the process of transition from the French intervention in Mali a few weeks ago to a UN force. There have been a number of discussions in the council on Syria, but without any result. There have been open debates on counter-terrorism, peacekeeping, the Middle East, and the protection of civilians in armed conflict. And that debate on the protection of civilians in armed conflict, which was held about 2 weeks ago under the South Korean presidency, was a very good debate. There were 70-odd countries with an open debate, so non-members of the council participated. There was something like 70-odd countries spoke. And importantly, there was a very positive reference to R2P, to the responsibility to protect, in the presidential statement that came out of the council. The responsibility to protect concept has been one that's been under significant pressure over recent years, particularly following Libya. But it was good to see that the council was able to at least accept a positive reference to it in this most recent statement. There was also about 2 weeks ago, tomorrow, what is known as an ARIA formula meeting on climate change and security. I'm getting used to get to know what all these different things to talk about. Well, ARIA formula, I looked at people, what's that? An ARIA formula is actually an informal meeting of the council. It's not a formal council exercise, but it's an informal meeting which council members can call and bring in other members of the UN, but also bring in experts, non-government organisations, to have a discussion on a particular issue. And on this occasion, Pakistan and the United Kingdom held an ARIA formula meeting on climate change and security. And I should say the issue of climate change and security is a very sensitive issue within the council. There are a number of council members who are very doubtful about the fact as to about whether climate change and security should be on the council's agenda. We were able to actually pull off a bit of a coup with that, because a few days before the meeting, Senator Carr was doing a visit in the Pacific, and we got him to do a video with President Song of Kiribati on a beach in Kiribati, and talking about the impact of climate change on small island states, and in particular the threat of rising sea levels. And so we got this video done in Kiribati, got it sent over to New York, and it was shown during the meeting, and there was a lot of appreciation for that particular effort. As I mentioned, Africa issues continue to be very dominant on the council. Sudan, South Sudan and Darfur, the council meets fortnightly. Every fortnight the council sits down and considers the situation in Sudan and South Sudan. There are consultations in relation to Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Guinea-Bissau, Cote d'Ivoire, and issues relating to Central African Republic and Burundi. It's an enormous agenda, tragically so in many respects. We saw the renewal of the Cyprus mandate for the Council's UN presence in Cyprus in January. Australia, of course, has been committing personnel to that particular operation in Cyprus since 1964. We also had a council mission to Yemen. The council does missions from time to time in which the permanent representatives get the opportunity to go to see a situation on the ground, up front and personal. And there was a visit organised to Yemen in January, which Gary Quinlan, our permanent representative, participated in. Looking forward over the next few weeks and months, our expectation at this stage is the council's agenda will be pretty much as we've seen over the last few months, with one, I think, possible significant exception. Issues in relation to Afghanistan, North Korea, the whole Africa agenda, that will continue. The Africa agenda, I think, will see a significant development in relation to Mali and the potential for a UN operation there. The one issue where I think we will possibly see a real change is in relation to Syria. And those that hope that we'll be able to see the Council take action certainly do hope that in weeks and months that we'll see a change in attitude and a change perhaps in the situation in relation to Syria, which will enable the Council to take action there. And if the Council is able to, it will be a very, very significant involvement by the international community. So thank you again. I'm not sure if I've spoken for the half an hour or not, or whether I've gone over time, but I hope that gives you some sense of the agenda. It's a very big one. It's a very busy one. It's a great honour to be a member of the Council, but Council membership brings responsibilities. One of those responsibilities is to meet the sorts of commitments and expectations that we have facing us here in Australia and around the world. And part of the next 2 years is going to be very much about meeting those expectations. So I think I remind people I spent 2.5 years working for Gareth Evans, and that's where I got my first lot of grey hair, but I suspect after the rest of these 2 years working for Gareth may well have seemed like a real fun time. And Gareth remains a very good friend, I should say. Thank you very much.